Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Boss here with Crowd React Media. I want to welcome Scott Masteller to the Crowd React Media team as a sports consultant. Scott brings in over 40 years of sports media experience, including time with ESPN, ESPN Deportes, WBAL News Radio 1090, and FM 101.5 in Baltimore. Scott, thank you for being with us. Let's dive right in.
Okay, great to be here. Thanks, Sean.
Excellent. All right, so thinking back on your career so far, how important would you say research is in connecting with audiences?
I think it's probably never been more important than it is right now because there is such a saturation of choices that the consumer can make. And so you really have to know what your audience is looking for and then how you can deliver that product in a consistent basis. So having, the opportunity to do research really lets you connect with, the primary listeners, the P1s of whatever audio platform you're putting your content out on. And the other thing that's changed over the years, there's more in different audio platforms. I remember, because I've been in the business a long time, it was basically just a radio station, a television station, and a newspaper. Well, now, you and I could start a podcast up with us in remote locations. And if we're compelling enough and interesting enough, people are going to want to listen to the product that we put forth. So understanding what the consumer is looking for and understanding that each demographic has maybe a different approach to what they want, that's where research becomes very valuable. Being able to talk to those consumers face to face is really going to give a perspective that you can't get anywhere else. And I'm just a huge proponent of research.
Cool. Absolutely. And going back to your experience, given your success at ESPN, among other places, what advice would you give to current program directors with regards to research?
Know what you want to get done. Have a plan in terms of what you're going to want to find out from those that are listening to the station. And I think it's also important to have a real good understanding, not just what do they want, but how do they want it? How do they could get the consumption of that content in a way that's convenient for them? We're not just a broadcast medium anymore. With a smartphone, you can listen to whatever radio station you want, wherever you are on the planet. I know in my experience programming a station in Baltimore, I had people listening in Florida. I had callers calling from Florida, calling from California, calling from, Europe, because they want to connect with what's going on back home. So I think with putting a research project together, knowing what the project is going to entail, knowing how to get the most out of the people you're going to talk to, and really having a smart, intelligent questionnaire that will respect the time that the people that you're going to talk to will take to participate. There's nothing worse than going, and I've been to enough of these, to a research session and it goes on forever and ever. Just like anything else, the people that you're talking to have limited attention spans. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that you've got a really good plan, you ask the questions that really matter, and then afterwards you get together and dive into what that research means.
Cool. And switching gears here, I wanted to get into some content. There's been a sort of frenzy of rights acquisition and sports streaming and digital content, like you were just talking about, over the past few years among all the major sports leagues. In your opinion, what is the future of sports streaming?
Well, look, I think, probably the best medium to talk about in terms of sports is the National Football League and how smart they've been with their overall approach to content. And you saw in the latest, new wave of contracts, they're branching out. What are they doing? Amazon has streaming rights and presents Thursday Night Football, online. That's how you have to get the broadcast. Mm-hmm. But they went out and invested. Al Michaels, one of the greatest play-by-play guys of all time, Kirk Herbstreit from ESPN, they knew they had to have credibility. Now, you're always at the mercy of what games you're going to have. But the reality is more and more, especially the younger demographics, they want to watch the game on their iPhone. You'll see all the commercials on television, for the different media companies, like AT&T, they're at the wedding and the person's sitting there screaming about the game, watching the game, because that's what people do. So I think you're going to see more and more of that in the future. I still think it's going to be very big for broadcast television and broadcast radio, but the platforms are moving to what is convenient for the consumer. and the consumer wants to watch things online wherever they are. They may be out at an event on a Sunday, and if they got their phone or their iPad with them, they can still watch their favorite pro sports team. So you're going to continue to see more and more rights deals have that component. The next really big rights deal coming up in television and media will be the NBA. Mm-hmm. And the NBA, much like the NFL, is looking to have more and more of their content online. And they're looking to do that with their current providers if they can get the right amount of revenue in those deals, which would be TNT and ESPN. I think you're going to see, I think I heard the commissioner saying he's looking for some astronomical amount of money, and he's kind of setting the table for that. But they know that right now, these sports properties that produce games, they need tons and tons of content, and they have to pay for it. So I think you're going to see this as a trend that will just expand more and more. I don't know if they'll ever go away from TV completely, but I see the online streaming, the different platforms being more and more a part of the project.
Right. So I want to get a little bit more into the weeds here with the next question. Sports betting seems to be on the back burner at ESPN, with Bob Iger coming back as CEO of Disney. Do you see ESPN throwing their hat in the sports betting ring anytime soon?
They're doing some stuff now. They've got some of their talent out in Las Vegas. It's kind of a process that they're evolving into. Mm-hmm. Why is everybody getting into sports betting? Because the companies that are involved in terms of media can make money. Mm-hmm. There's just a major influx of revenue in terms of advertising taking place with sports betting, something that the medium of television and radio hasn't seen in a long, long time. You're seeing it integrated into the product of sports television in terms of pregame shows, postgame shows, even during the game. You see it in Major League Baseball, in the pregame shows there. It's just more and more part of kind of the fabric of what's going on. ESPN is really smart about how they do things. Obviously, with Bob Iger in charge of that group now, I won't be surprised by anything they do. I think that, if they can generate revenue and it's a good return on investment, I think you'll see a lot of that with ESPN.
Gotcha. What role do you think media and technology will play in the future of sports betting?
I think it's going to be huge, because what is important to the consumer? When you see the ads on television, what are they all doing? They're with their smartphone and they're placing their wager on the smartphone. They're talking to somebody like they're actually at wherever the event is taking place and trying to get reaction right away. So I think, technology is going to be, it's instantaneous. If you look at a big game coming up in football or basketball, depending upon how, important the game is, you may see the betting lines move during the week. So that's all fodder now for content development and content reaction. And it's all being determined by the consumer. The consumer is going to dictate this. The consumer is going to say, I want this stuff, but I want it where it's easy and convenient for me. And really, it's on the smartphone more than any other device, I think, is where you're going to see this.
Cool. And so going back to radio, how has sports betting impacted the sports radio industry?
Well, you've seen some of the big players, that own multiple stations start sports betting networks right away. Mm-hmm. They've got content that is specifically focused on sports gaming, sports media, sports betting, all those different things, and they're doing that because the different companies that are involved in the business are looking for content and looking for ways to promote their product. You're seeing also, personalities and radio stations doing a lot of, I'll call them endorsements, but they're doing pitches for these different companies. On your first bet, you get X. On your second bet, you get Y. And you're hearing a proliferation of those commercials now more than you ever have. And that will continue as, states ramp up their ability to have that kind of, entertainment in their respective states. Some states are there, some states are not, but it's just going to continue to grow. Got to be able to manage it all and see what makes sense, but it's definitely part of the landscape.
Totally. Interesting. So the legalization of sports betting is spreading like wildfire in the States. What advice would you give the sports radio stations and markets where sports betting has just become legal?
So I think it's important for there to be smart communication internally. And that to me is between the program director
Mhm.
and the sales manager. Don't let one dictate the other. Make sure that as you put content together, if it's not a station where you're doing local product, that the content complements what that station is all about. You've got to be able to put the process together so that there's no surprises, nobody gets caught off guard, and you have to manage expectations in terms of what you're going to be able to do and what you're not going to be able to do. I also think if you're in a big market where there's interest in a particular sport, football, basketball, pro sports, college sports, if you can integrate this into your local content. People have been talking about betting lines and games for years and years and years. They always put the lines in the newspaper. Well, now it's more commonplace to have those kinds of conversations. So how are you going to integrate that into your content and presentation? And then making sure you're aware of any rules and regulations that are mandated in terms of this kind of advertising. What's in every state may be different. So, having a good FCC attorney in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense in these kind of situations so that nobody gets caught by surprise.
Right. Gotcha. A lot has been made of declining attention spans of younger demographics. Do you see this impacting the sports media industry in any way?
Yeah, I see it impacting all of media. I see it impacting every demographic that is out there. There's been numerous, research that has been done. I remember in my early days, people would say, well, you got about 15 seconds to connect. Now, basically, there's different totals according to different people, but I basically say you got 6 to 8 seconds to really connect with the audience. And so, one of the big things I've always told talent and programmers, if I'm the consumer, if I'm listening to your radio station or your audio platform, don't waste my time. When one of the things I really appreciated about the talent we had at ESPN when I was there, I'll give credit to Mike Greenberg and Mike Golick. When the red light went on, they didn't do, hi, how you doing, what's going on? They just went right to the content, whatever the biggest story of the day is. If you think about music formats over the year, it's always been about play the hits. Well, it's the same thing with sports or news talk or whatever the format is. What's the hit of the day? Some days it's really easy. I've always said the easiest day of the year to be in sports radio generally is the day after the Super Bowl. That's all you're going to talk about. And you're not going to waste time. You're going to get right to that content. But what are you going to do 4 or 5 days after that, where it's all kind of worn off and the luster has gone away? How are you going to connect with your audience? So really understanding that you've got to be good, you got to play the hits, and you got to understand too, which I think is one of the most important things to tell content providers, is that programming today is not linear. It's not, we're going to have a show today and we're going to do A, B, C, and D in that order. It's really going to be whatever the biggest storyline is, you're going to come back to that storyline multiple times. Because let's say if you're going on the air at 6 a.m., by the time you get to 7 a.m., your audience is completely different. By the time you get to 8 a.m., it's completely different again. And if there's a really big story, you got to focus on that story and give people content that they just can't get enough of.
Right. Well, excellent. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.